Senator Patterson.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
My questions are about cybersecurity. They relate to the budget, so you may need to get the assistance of the CEO. Does the government anticipate that the cybersecurity threats facing Australia are going to decline significantly in the financial years 24, 25 and 26?
To the contrary, the Minister's made it clear that the challenge that's before our economy, our society at large, whether it's large firms or the most vulnerable people, will continue to metastasise as the attackers become more savvy. And the whole premise of doing a new cybersecurity strategy is to try to anticipate and future-proof to the point where we can say that we're the most cyber-secure nation on earth by 2030. If you're going to ask me about funding declines, I've got every confidence that the government will attend to the need to spend more on cybersecurity, noting, of course, Senator, before I might be preempting where you're about to go, there's a very significant investment through the Red Spice program in the Defence Department that will very significantly enhance Australia's national cyber defence. They're the operators of that technology and those capabilities.
Yes, I do know that.
Whereas we're the policy and regulatory arm. Well, you haven't asked me yet.
No, I haven't asked a question. You were anticipating my subsequent follow-up questions, which is very kind of you, but not necessary. I can ask them on my own, and perhaps
thank you, Senator. I was getting ahead of myself. Minister.
Answer them when they're asked, rather than.
I thought he was heading where you thought he was heading.
Yeah. Well, how about we?
Are you heading where I'm heading?
Yeah. Thanks, Minister. How about we have an approach where you answer the questions that I ask you, not the ones you think I'm going to ask next. But you have accurately anticipated my next question. The budget forecasts a significant reduction in funding for the department on cybersecurity from 38 million in this financial year to 15 million. In the next financial year, 23-24, to 15 million the subsequent year.
Yep.
I mean, if it is as you say, and as the Minister has said, that the cybersecurity challenges are getting greater, not lesser, how is the department going to do with about half, or in fact less than half, of the funding in the subsequent financial years?
Thank you, Senator, and I do apologise for anticipating, but I must have fluked it because I thought you might be going to that funding item. So there is a particular provision that I think exclusively is in support of Mr Hansford's discharge of his responsibilities, which partly relate to what I was just discussing with Senator Polley, which is the cyber and infrastructure security function that sits under Mr Hansford. We do have an authorised return to government to prove up the level of resourcing that we're going to require as these risk management plans and these other SOCI-related designations and cybersecurity-related responses become more evident. And I think it's fair to say, Ms Cargill, that we were extended for some funding that was otherwise going to terminate. Sorry, I don't want to trigger that, but there was some funding for the SOCI function that came to an end. We've been given some additional funding so Mr Hansford can get on with it, and we've been asked to come back with some more science and some more particulars.
Thank you. I will come to that additional funding.
Have I got that right, Ms Cargill?
Certainly, so I can explain the drop-off, Senator, if you...
Please.
Right. So the reduction in the funding between 23-24 and 24-25 is the $24 million specifically, or 23.8. So it's predominantly related to the additional funding in this year. So the funding we received this year under the cybersecurity measure was a total of $37.3 million over the forwards, but was 27.9 in 23-24, which was made up of 4 components. So there was the SOCI-SONS, I'm allowed to say SOCI-SONS component at 19.5. There was the Cyber Hubs component, a measure from AGD in relation to ASD, Act Now Stay Secure, and the hosting of the certification framework. Only one of those items is continuing over the forward. So the item Act Now Stay Secure is consistent over the forward estimates. The other 3 are funding for 23-24, and as the Secretary's noted, we have comebacks to government. So that's the drop-off.
Sure, and I imagine, Mr Bozzullo, as you did when we were talking about the department's overall funding, in anticipating your answer to my next question, as you've anticipated my questions, you'll say that you'll go to government and seek more funds and that you're confident you'll get it. But as it stands, the only available information we have today is the government plans to cut the amount of money it spends through the department on cybersecurity almost in half.
If I can add one particular... So I did make that general statement to you under corporate before the break, but there's a particular additional element here. The Minister is leading, as I've indicated, a cybersecurity strategy. The government took the view, it's not for me to determine whether it was reasonable, but I just will add the not unreasonable view that when that cybersecurity strategy comes back, we want to see all of the funding items, including what we're currently funded for, or what we have funded, I should say. What is the threat landscape? What are the strategic priorities that the Minister has? And then what does the funding envelope look like? So rather than just giving you a general answer that I'm confident that we can demonstrate in the general, I'm saying that in this case there's going to be a specific vehicle called the Cybersecurity Strategy 2030, where all of these questions will need to be ventilated amongst, for the decision-making of government, subject to, of course, their decision-making. But they certainly won't be deficient in any advice around either the threat or the strategic environment that we face.
So is it your evidence to the committee that we need not worry and that, in actuality, this cut won't materialise before that financial year? It will be rectified and there won't be a $24 million cut to cybersecurity funding at the department?
Well, I think as Ms Cargill said, there are a number of items in that overall. I think you said there were 4 sub-elements from memory. One of the sub-elements and the largest component of it is the ongoing funding and resourcing for our critical infrastructure security regulatory
Sorry to stop
function.
you there, Mr Pezzullo, but that's, as Ms Cargill said, that's in this financial year.
Yes,
I'm
correct.
asking about future financial years.
So from 24 onwards?
Exactly.
I would have every confidence that the government will have a chance to, now subject to what they decide, it's not for me to direct or determine how they decide these things, but I've got every confidence that well before the start of the financial year on 1 July 24, we'll have certainty and clarity around our resourcing, either as a result of the standard budget process, so my e-phone budget, and or as modified or as decided through the cybersecurity strategy.
Thank you.
Senator, can I just add, it's not just about confidence, it's about track record as well. As an example, I can give you the amounts that have been supplemented year on year to the department's operating budget every year, and they average at $300 million between the year previous, and then when we get to the next budget year, there's an additional funding provided of approximately $300 million every year into our budget.
You're making a general statement on
Yes, of course. That would
right.
then have wider implications for the government's forecasting of its expenditure in subsequent years. Are you saying we shouldn't trust Mr Chalmers' forecasts for budget surpluses or deficits, and we'll need to factor in a $300 million increase or thereabouts to the department?
I'm saying each year we have annual amounts that we prosecute through each budget process, and that's been the case for some time. So I can, if I'm talking about the specific departmental operating budget in 1920, for example, the 2021 baseline, that budget was supplemented by $242 million. The next year was $283 million. The next year was $300 million. It is standard that we have a number of annual components of our budget.
Great. Well, we will look forward to watching that in subsequent financial years. Ms Cargill, you talked about some additional funding in this budget for cybersecurity, and as you say, most of it's acquitted in this coming financial year. How much of that additional funding has come from either cuts or reprioritisation of other parts of government, other agencies, other programs?
I couldn't answer that.
Well, how much of it,
we wouldn't know, would we?
to go back to the traditional estimates question, how much of it is new money and how much of it is money that's come from elsewhere?
So, for example, the amounts that I just quoted to you, the $37.3 million that was related to the cybersecurity additional funding that we received, this is all new funding.
What about the $12.3 million which is cut from the ASD to fund part of that?
Well, I'm not privy to the... So the ASD was a measure and the funding was transferred from the ASD to us.
Correct, which is a cut.
What's the trend?
It's new money for us.
Well, not for ASD. It's not new money for ASD. So this is my point. Some of this new funding which you're talking about, in fact, has come from another agency.
That's
in
the
this
only
case,
component that's a transfer.
in this case, ASD, our premier cybersecurity agency of government. So it's not actually new funding for cybersecurity. It's funding for cybersecurity that's come from one part of government to another.
I think, Senator, it's commonly understood that if there's a transference of functions with the people and the dollars that are associated with that function, it's not a cut as such, because the function, to your point, is still being performed. It's just a transference.
But it's also not new money, though, is it, Secretary?
Well, I think, what did you say? It's new money for, quote, us. Is that
Well,
is that
I
what
was
you
giving
said?
you the departmental funding.
Yeah, well,
We've received
I'm
the
interested in whole of government, and the ASD, I appreciate, is not in your portfolio, but it would be the agency outside your portfolio you would probably work the most closely with, given the function of the Cyber Security Centre.
That is true.
So what I'm trying to ascertain is how much of this is genuinely new money that hasn't just been taken from another department or agency or another program within your department.
I think of the 4 measures, was that the only transferred measure?
Correct.
Yeah. So 1.
Okay. So none of those other funds have come from elsewhere within the department or the portfolio?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Why should the ASD be relied upon to fund quote-unquote increases in cyber security? Isn't it kind of a rob Peter to pay Paul situation if it were taking from a cyber security agency to fund a cyber security program?
I think in the case of the measure in question, it was a decision taken by the government that this is for sort of cyber awareness. Yep. So can you just briefly describe to the Senator what the function is?
Sure.
I don't think anyone's been robbed. It's a decision taken by government that this function is better performed in a policy department or a Department of State, shall we say. And so I think you've had both a transference of people and dollars, but essentially it's a public awareness function, is it not?
It's true. The Act Now Stay Secure campaign is a direct
Just say that again.
The Act Now Stay Secure campaign is a direct transfer of the function between ASD and Home Affairs to support the National Cybersecurity Coordinator's role to look at national related awareness and to think about how we bring together our awareness campaigns on cyber security across the Commonwealth with a particular focus on that funding. So it was an additional function and that the government decided in the context of the stand-up of a coordinator.
So just to clarify, it's your evidence that other than people who may be transferred, who are working at ASD or ACSC, to now work on this same project, but for the department instead.
With funding.
With this funding, which has come over, that the ASD won't be required to make any other cuts or reduce its staffing levels in order to accommodate this transfer?
That's probably more a question you need to put to ASD, I would have thought.
I plan to. Because, of course, it's not the only cut to ASD's funding in this budget. There's also a cut in the Attorney General's portfolio to fund greater oversight of the intelligence agencies from ASD. We're not just using ASD as a bit of a piggy bank here that can be smashed when other departments need the money, are we?
I can't speak to ASD's resourcing. The one measure that I'm clear about is that there's been a transference without a cut to either people or dollars as far as I know.
650,
It's just a straight transfer of 6 staff members plus the associated. They must have some money to spend on.
That's right, of the campaign money. So
Campaign money, yep. As to your assertion that ASD's been otherwise cut is something you'll need to put to the Director General and her Minister in another committee.
Thank you. I will look forward to doing that. Moving on to the cyber security strategy.
Just have a couple more minutes and then I have to hand the call over.
Thanks, Chair. What's the total cost to date of the development of the cyber security strategy?
Mr Hansford, so there's some departmental resources, there's some expert advisory resources. Do you have anything?
I don't have an overall quantum. We've got staff associated working for the strategy and we have some targeted consultancies as well.
Could you come back on notice with the total expenditure and also break it down to compensation for the expert advisory board, any costs of current or planned travel for the expert advisory board?
We'll come back on notice.
Thank you. Any consulting or advisory services that have been brought in to assist in the development of the strategy, and an itemised list of those services, any external services provided, and any other costs associated with the development of the strategy. How much new money has been directed under the cybersecurity strategy so far?
Well, the strategy hasn't been finalised or brought to government by the minister, so
none.
Sorry, what was the question? How much new money?
Yep.
Has been
directed under the cybersecurity strategy?
Directed to what purpose? To the strategy.
How much money has been spent on the strategy?
I see. Okay. So we'll come back to your notice on the cost of developing the strategy, which is the itemised list that you've just read out. We'll come back to your notice. The strategy itself, like any strategy or government plan, will need to be finalised in the minister's own mind as to what she wishes to bring forward to cabinet or the NSC. There'll be a budget process associated with that, and there will be no doubt measures, programs, and projects that arise from the cybersecurity strategy that she'll announce when she announces the strategy.
Thank you. Were any of the initiatives from the previous cybersecurity strategy announced in 2020, have any of them been cut or discontinued?
Well, no decision has been taken as the final shape of the strategy. So anything that we're funded to do or anything that we're required to do or anything that we're rolling out either pursuant to SOCI or to the 2020 cybersecurity strategy, or indeed in some cases there are some enduring measures from the 2016 strategy, they're all in flight. They're all.
So no measure under the 2020 cybersecurity strategy has been brought to an end?
Unless it had a terminating or lapsing character, but can you think of anything that's been changed?
Of the 1.67 billion in the strategy, 1.35 of that related to ASD, so probably a question to ask them. That there are some elements which were grant rounds, for example, which are time limited, principally run out of the Department of Industry. There was funding for the Australian Federal Police, which I believe was over a 4-year period, funding for ID care, so a range of initiatives, some of which are 10 years in length, some of which are 4 years in length, and some of which are time limited. So I'd just have to check on whether or not any of those have actually finished, given the time limited nature of some of them.
Okay. So,
Senator Patterson, I do have to hand the call over.
Thank you. Can I ask one last question
no,
on this
area? No, you can't. I gave you